Have you ever noticed that most people are driven not by what they desire, but by what they fear losing? It's hard to admit, but human beings are slaves to scarcity. It's not abundance that governs, it's lack. And this is so powerful that it turns free men into servants of an idea. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that power lies not in what is given, but in what is taken away. The end justifies the means because absence can be worth more than presence. What is rare becomes precious, even if it is useless. What is inaccessible gains value, even if it lacks substance. The whole world dances to this tune, even without realizing it. Want a cruel example? Think about love. How many people crawl after those who treat them with indifference but ignore those who give too much of themselves? It's unfair, but it's true. Is it better to be feared than loved? Yes, but even better is to be desired because you're inaccessible. Scarcity not only manipulates the mind, it distorts the heart. Those who master this weapon don't need to beg for affection, respect, or obedience. They simply withdraw and let the emptiness work for them. Absence speaks louder than 1,000 words, and the fragile human mind transforms this absence into obsession. In commerce, the logic is the same. How many times have you bought something simply because it was the last unit, or visited a website and clicked the buy button because it said only 2 left in stock? This isn't a coincidence. It's calculated manipulation. It's the calculated use of force at its most sophisticated, not pushing, but pulling desire until it becomes unbearable. Virtue and fortune are on the side of those who know how to tap into this instinct. Decisions aren't born of reason, they're born of haste, fear, and the illusion of loss. And without realizing it, you've already become a slave. But here's the challenge few have the courage to face. You do it too. Do you control your presence to appear more interesting? Have you ever kept quiet just so someone would chase your attention? This isn't just instinct, it's strategy. Decisions based on real human nature show that everyone at some point has used scarcity as a weapon. The difference is that some use it consciously and govern, others use it unconsciously and become governed. The battlefield isn't out there, it's within each of us. Whoever controls scarcity controls perception, and therein lies the danger. Because if you don't learn to use scarcity, someone will use it against you. Avoiding being hated remains the rule, but not being manipulated requires awareness. The world will try to make you chase crumbs, believing you need to fight for what may not even be valuable. The appearance of virtue can be a disguise, and what seems rare may be just a well-crafted illusion. The question is, will you remain a slave to desire, or will you turn the tables and transform scarcity into your ally? Because whoever masters this invisible code doesn't just attract, they govern. When Machiavelli looked at human behavior, he saw not just kings and soldiers, but hidden patterns that moved multitudes. Among these patterns, scarcity reveals itself as one of the most powerful weapons. It's not just a lack of resources, but a profound trick that works within the mind. It's curious, the less accessible something is, the more human eyes shine to possess it. This applies not only to material goods, but also to attention, love, and recognition. It's the same logic as a sold-out ticket, a rare book, or even that person who is never fully available. All become desired as if they were treasures. And here lies a policy guided by reality, not ideals. People desire not what is good, but what is rare. Therefore, leaders, strategists, and even lovers know that the end justifies the means when it comes to manipulating the sense of lack. Imagine a simple dinner, 2 options on the menu, one plentiful and inexpensive, the other scarce and limited. Which dish would most people choose? Logic suggests the most affordable option, but human psychology prefers what seems to slip through the fingers. This is where the game of virtu and fortuna comes in. The leader who understands this mechanism can, with a calculated use of the symbolic power of scarcity, bend wills without raising their voice. Loyal armies have been mobilized not only by promises of glory, but by rare opportunities such as disputed lands or limited riches. Likewise, a digital influencer who closes enrollment for a course in a few days uses precisely this dynamic, restricting access and transforming hesitation into feverish desire. But scarcity doesn't just affect the collective, it also operates in small, everyday gestures. Think about friendship. The more someone always seems available, the more their presence becomes commonplace. Conversely, a friend who rarely but significantly appears becomes valued. This isn't coincidence. It's a reflection of decisions based on real human nature, where abundance breeds boredom and absence breeds enchantment. The secret, as Machiavelli said, is to avoid being hated, but also to avoid overextending oneself, because perceived value arises from rarity. The appearance of virtue, when combined with well-calculated doses of absence, creates an irresistible aura. This is where we begin to see how scarcity isn't just a detail, but a mechanism of power that paves the way for something even more intriguing, how it alters people's very perceptions. The human mind is a strange machine. It responds not to the logic of abundance, but to the allure of what slips through the cracks of scarcity. When something is rare, a silent tension is created that traps thoughts. It's not just about material resources, it's a game of desire and fear. Desire for what is elusive and fear of losing what was never achieved. Machiavelli knew that politics guided by reality, not ideals, demonstrated this pattern in every royal court or assembly of power. The more limited access to the prince, the greater the devotion he aroused. And herein lies the lesson. The end justifies the means when one learns to orchestrate this invisible sensation, which transforms even the most common into something of inestimable value. Think about romantic relationships. How often does someone who's always present end up being taken for granted, almost invisible? And the one who appears less but leaves a lasting impression becomes unforgettable. This dynamic shows how the calculated use of force doesn't have to be physical. It can be psychological, and scarcity is its sharpest blade. It's virtu in action, knowing how to manipulate the fortunes of circumstances to heighten the perception of value. Decisions based on true human nature reveal that the mind clings to what escapes. That's why we see auctions skyrocketing in price, sold-out tickets becoming treasures, or even online promotions disappearing in minutes. All of this proves that the power of scarcity is less about what's missing and more about what it provokes within us, an almost irrational urgency. This emotional mechanism isn't new, but it remains relevant. Governments control populations by restricting access to information. Companies make fortunes with limited edition products. Charismatic leaders win over loyal armies not through abundance, but through the promise of something exclusive. Better to be feared than loved, perhaps. But even better is to be rare, because the rare doesn't need to beg for love or respect. It is sought after. Scarcity creates a symbolic space that elevates even the banal to the status of treasure. The appearance of virtue, when associated with that which few can touch, generates an almost mystical aura. And if the mind is already capable of bending to the idea of little, imagine what happens when perception is altered, and the little becomes not only desired, but indispensable. Since ancient times, men have bowed before the rare, a precious stone hidden deep within the earth, a manuscript stored in secret libraries, or even the limited presence of a leader who only reveals himself on special occasions, all bear the mark of scarcity. What is rare awakens the imagination and provokes sighs of desire, as if touched by fortune itself. Machiavelli saw in this an uncomfortable truth. People are not bent by what is abundant, but by what is difficult to attain. This is where virtue comes in, knowing how to manipulate this perception, transforming the simple into the extraordinary. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that even silence can be louder than 1,000 words, as long as it is rare. Consider the modern world. Tech companies launch new phones every year, but they always create a limited edition that triggers a rush of consumers. It's not the object itself that attracts, but the aura of rarity that surrounds it. Does the end justify the means? For those who master this strategy, yes. The calculated use of force requires not swords, but psychology. And nothing is more psychological than the feeling of imminent loss. He who controls attention also controls desire. And when something rare appears, the crowd doesn't just look, they compete, fight, pay more, and humble themselves. Loyal armies aren't made up solely of soldiers. Sometimes they're made up of followers who believe they have access to something exclusive, and so they become loyal to the last drop of blood or money. But this doesn't just happen in business or politics. Consider the value of a rare friendship. That friend who speaks little but always has a word to say is worth more than 100 superficial companions. Or in passion, the less predictable someone is, the more space they occupy in other people's hearts. Decisions based on true human nature show that people don't pursue what is abundant, but what hides behind the curtain of inaccessibility. Avoiding being hated is wise, but being rare is even more strategic because it transforms absence into presence. The appearance of virtue, when tempered with scarcity, becomes magnetic. And here begins the next secret. If what is rare attracts the eye, it is because scarcity alters not only desire, but the very perception of reality. The human mind doesn't perceive the world neutrally. It interprets, distorts, and amplifies it according to the stimuli it receives. When something is scarce, the brain creates a lens that magnifies its value, even if objectively it isn't that relevant. This is why we see people chasing flash sales, fighting over products on sale, or lusting after people who seem distant. Machiavelli already anticipated this mechanism. Decisions based on real human nature would never be logical, but emotional. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that scarcity can transform common stones into symbolic diamonds. Does the end justify the means? Yes, when the goal is to manipulate this lens that makes the rare irresistible. Imagine two simple scenarios, a room full of available chairs and another with only 3. Where do people feel the greatest urgency to sit? Scarcity alters perception because it activates primitive fears. The fear of losing, of being left out, of being last. It's the same instinct that drove multitudes to follow leaders who rarely appeared but left traces of power in every gesture. Loyal armies were formed not just by speech, but by the feeling of limited access to the prince's presence. Better to be feared than loved, perhaps, but better still is to be seen as inaccessible, because inaccessibility generates more respect than constant familiarity. The appearance of virtue, when combined with scarcity, creates an aura that completely changes how we are perceived. This phenomenon is so powerful that it can be observed even in small, everyday situations. An out-of-print book becomes coveted by collectors. An airport lounge arouses curiosity and envy. A message seen but not responded to generates more anxiety than 1,000 quick replies. It is the calculated use of psychological force at its core. Virtù and fortuna meet when someone understands that being good is not enough. One must be perceived as rare. Perception is shaped not by truth, but by scarcity. And if perception is so easily manipulated, the inevitable question arises, How far can this distortion go when we begin to intentionally apply scarcity to our presences and absences? It's almost an invisible law. The more inaccessible something becomes, the more human beings project value onto it, even if that value is largely an illusion. Machiavelli observed this in princes who, by restricting access to their inner circle, aroused blind loyalties. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that it's not abundance that wins hearts, but the difficulty of winning them. The end justifies the means when the leader chooses to appear sparingly, and precisely for this reason, each appearance becomes an event. In everyday life, it's enough to notice how a sold-out course or a limited job opening sparks an immediate rush, not because it's actually better, but because it seems rarer. Consider relationships. When someone is always available, it creates the opposite effect, almost a devaluation. However, when that same person decides to become more selective with their time, others begin to fight for their presence. It's a calculated use of psychological force. No confrontation is required, just controlled absence. Virtue and fortune work together in this game because it's not just about luck, but the ability to create conditions in which other people's desires flourish. Decisions based on true human nature reveal that rarity awakens ancestral competitive instincts, like in auctions, where two people fight over an item that, otherwise, might not spark their interest. This mechanism also explains why leaders and strategists understand that it's better to be feared than loved. Fear stems from the perception that the other is inaccessible, distant, and difficult to subdue. And precisely for this reason, respected. Avoiding being hated remains essential, but it's the aura of rarity that sustains authority. The appearance of virtue, when combined with a selective presence, becomes irresistible. The human mind, after all, tends to inflate with value everything it can't easily touch. It's as if scarcity places a magnifying glass on the object or person. And if the difficult is already naturally valued, imagine what happens when scarcity is consciously used to intensify not only value, but also desire. When something seems to escape, a fire is born within the human being that consumes them from within. Desire. It's not a simple want, but an inflamed, almost irrational desire. This is how scarcity works. It not only suggests value, but ignites the flame of urgency. Machiavelli, always attentive to politics guided by reality, not ideals, saw this phenomenon in every power negotiation. The prince who strategically retreated, who made himself inaccessible by choice, multiplied his magnetism. The end justifies the means when the goal is to arouse this collective frenzy. In modern commerce, we see this in strategies like last units or promotion valid until midnight. Desire ceases to be a choice and becomes a compulsion. Interestingly, this dynamic isn't limited to consumer goods. It manifests itself in the most intimate relationships. Someone who is always present can generate comfort, but rarely generates desire. However, someone who manages their presence intelligently provokes an almost hypnotic attraction. It's the calculated use of force, not to dominate through fear, but to ignite fascination. Virtue and fortune meet here. Virtue to decide when to appear and when to retreat. Fortune to ensure that the right timing enhances the effect. Decisions based on real human nature show that scarcity stirs deep instincts, leading people to act before thinking, often against their own logic. This is why loyal armies are built not only with discipline, but with symbols of exclusivity. A rare medal, a selective ritual, restricted access, all of these generate not only obedience, but devotion. Is it better to be feared than loved? Yes, but even better is to be desired, because desire leads others to willingly offer themselves to the power that guides them. Avoiding hatred remains the rule, but arousing attraction is a superior strategy. The appearance of virtue, when tempered with calculated doses of scarcity, creates a kind of invisible magnetism. And if scarcity can intensify desire and urgency to this extent, the next step is to understand how intentional presence and absence can be used as true weapons of influence. There's an almost invisible power in knowing when to appear and, especially, when to withdraw. Being present all the time creates custom, and custom kills charm. Intentional absence, on the other hand, generates expectation, curiosity, and even discomfort. Machiavelli knew that politics guided by reality, not ideals, required of the prince not only strength, but also mystery. The end justifies the means when the strategy is to become more desired precisely by not always being accessible. Think of luxury brands. They're not on every corner. They don't have sales all the time. They don't oversell themselves. They understand that value lies not only in the product, but in the control of presence. In personal life, the logic is the same. A leader who appears constantly loses the aura of command, one who speaks little, but at the right moment becomes unforgettable. This is the calculated use of force at its most refined, imposing not through intensity, but through selectivity. Virtue and fortune go hand in hand in this game because it takes skill to manage absence without generating indifference, and luck to ensure the right moment makes an impact. Decisions based on true human nature show that what is scarce captures more attention than what is abundant. Therefore, strategically retreating can be more powerful than relentlessly advancing. This tactic is also visible in the digital world. Influencers who post non-stop fall into oblivion, but those who know how to balance their silence create anxiety in their followers. Loyal armies of their own remain faithful not only for what they receive, but for what they expect to receive. Better to be feared than loved? Perhaps, but even better is to be awaited, because the awaited never loses space in the imagination. Avoiding being hated remains essential, but controlled absence produces respect and desire in equal doses. The appearance of virtue, when intermittently present, creates a glow that never fades. And if absence can be as strategic as presence, imagine the impact when we link this idea to the direct influence on power and leadership. Scarcity and power have gone hand in hand since humans began organizing societies. The leader who controls limited resources not only governs, but also shapes behavior. Machiavelli knew that politics guided by reality, not ideals, revealed this cruel mechanism. Those who offer restricted access dominate attention and create dependence. The end justifies the means when scarcity becomes a tool of command, because it not only arouses desire, but also generates obedience. The calculated absence of presence or resources becomes a silent invitation for others to chase. Ultimately, power has never been about abundance, but about what few can touch. In the business world, this logic is clear. A company that controls an exclusive technology attracts investors, partners, and even enemies because its scarcity generates influence. It's the calculated use of force, not brute force, but the ability to restrict access to shape choices. Virtue and fortune manifest when the strategist creates conditions in which the other believes they are facing something rare, even when it isn't. Decisions based on true human nature show that people react more to what can escape than to what is available. Politicians do this by controlling information, artists by appearing in few shows, spiritual leaders by isolating themselves to create magnetism. An everyday example, someone who becomes less available in relationships often attracts more attention than someone who is always present. This is scarcity acting as a value amplifier. Loyal armies are often sustained not only by discipline, but by symbols of restricted access, exclusive rituals, and rare moments of closeness. Is it better to be feared than loved? Yes, but even more powerful is being seen as inaccessible, because this generates both respect and attraction. Avoiding being hated remains a rule, but transforming your presence into something rare is a superior strategy. The appearance of virtue, when tempered with scarcity, becomes unquestionable authority. And if scarcity can reshape power relations, what does it reveal about human behavior in the face of rarity? When human beings realize something is running out, their minds go into overdrive. Logical reasoning gives way to irrational impulses. This is where scarcity shows its true face. It transforms ordinary people into gamblers, willing to do anything for a tiny slice of what they believe to be valuable. Machiavelli understood this clearly because he observed that decisions based on true human nature are born not of reason, but of emotion. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the fear of losing is stronger than the desire to win. The end justifies the means when leaders exploit this vulnerability to move crowds. Simply announce last vacancies, and suddenly, what was previously ignored becomes an object of obsession. A classic example is market panics. When a stock starts to rise and rumors of scarcity emerge, investors rush desperately to buy, even without understanding the fundamentals. It's the calculated use of the invisible force of collective psychology. Virtue and fortune unite in the strategist who knows when to sow a sense of lack and reap blind devotion. In relationships, the same thing happens. When someone appears less accessible, the other party tends to fight to maintain closeness. Desire increases precisely because of the perception that they might lose access. Better to be feared than loved. Perhaps. But even better is to be seen as rare, because the rare creates emotional stirrings that the abundant never could. This irrational behavior, however, can lead people to act against their own interests. How many times has someone bought something unnecessary just because it was the last piece? How many times have they settled for less than they deserved for fear of being left with nothing? Avoiding hatred is a golden rule, but exploiting miscalculated scarcity can turn admiration into distrust. Loyal armies have rebelled when the promise of exclusivity proved a sham. The appearance of virtue can be used to legitimize restrictions, but if the illusion is shattered, loyalty dissolves. The human mind, fragile in the face of rarity, needs to be guided with balance. And if there is so much power and so much risk in scarcity, we must consider its limits and dangers before it turns against those who use it. Scarcity is a double-edged sword. It cuts in favor when handled well, but it can turn against the strategist. Machiavelli warned that any policy guided by reality, not ideals, requires cold calculation. When scarcity is overused, distrust is born. Does the end justify the means? Yes, as long as the means don't destroy the credibility of those who apply them. A product advertised as exclusive every month is no longer taken seriously. A leader who disappears excessively can be mistaken for weakness, not value. Better to be feared than loved remains valid, but being hated due to poor manipulation is a risk that compromises any authority. The error lies in believing that scarcity is a magic formula that works indefinitely. Nothing could be further from the truth. When human beings realize the trick, they react with revolt. Decisions based on true human nature show that people tolerate being guided but dislike being deceived. Virtue and fortune find balance, creating desire without falling into excess. It is the calculated use of force at its maximum limit. Loyal armies are not maintained solely by the promise of something rare. They demand concrete rewards to avoid feeling betrayed. The appearance of virtue, if used merely as a mask, cracks over time. Therefore, scarcity must be like seasoning, strong enough to add flavor, but never so intense that it spoils the dish. Scarcity isn't just a strategy others use against you, it's a secret code you can learn to use. Machiavelli showed that decisions based on real human nature are never born from ideals, but from what hurts, what's missing, what burns. The end justifies the means when you understand that you don't need to always be available to be valued. Power lies in choosing when to show up, when to retreat, when to let silence work for you. Better to be feared than loved, perhaps, but even better is to be remembered in your absence. Now the question remains, will you continue to overoffer yourself, or will you use scarcity as a weapon to elevate your own value? Examine your routine. In which areas of your life have you become too cheap? Where are you delivering presents without strategy? Virtue and fortune belong to those who refuse to live on autopilot. The calculated use of force can be found in the simple act of saying no, in the silence of a delayed response, in the discipline of not selling yourself short for any approval. Loyal armies of your own are built when you learn to command, not beg. Avoiding being hated is important, but avoiding being banal is even more so. Do you have the courage to create space to be valued, or will you remain hostage to being always accessible? Now I ask you, how many times have you lost respect for always being available? How many times have you chased after something worthless simply because it seemed rare? And how many times have you gone unremembered because you never knew how to retreat? The appearance of virtue may be a weapon, but scarcity is raw power. Are you ready to apply it today? If so, start now. Choose a space where you'll retreat and observe how the world reacts. And if this content has opened your eyes, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every week, you'll learn how to transform Machiavelli's strategies into real-life weapons. The next video may be just what you need to stop being manipulated and start manipulating.